Okay, we are chatting with Bram Kanstein. How do I say your last name? Kanstein. Kanstein. Is that how it is? Kanstein.
Like Goldstein.
How did you say your name? You said your name with a much better fluidity than I
say it in Dutch. Yeah, like Kanstein.
Kanstein.
But it's kind of like Goldstein, Kanstein.
Yeah,
like
got it. So, Bram, I'm just excited to talk to you. For those people who don't know you yet, can you just briefly introduce yourself? Who the heck are you? Why are you doing this thing that you're doing, this podcast? We're going to talk. I know you have some new stuff happening in your life as well. We're going to talk about it all. But just at a high level, who the heck are you? Why are we chatting?
So I think the quick summary is last 12 years I've been what I call a creative entrepreneur, mainly in like the digital business and startup space, mainly focused on, let's say, the 0 to 1 phase. So how do I get from an idea, like every creative person? I mean, you probably have tons of ideas as well, right? Like, how do you get from an idea to actually figuring out which one should I pursue, right? And then build and eventually grow. And I really like that phase because I love chatting about ideas, brainstorming ideas, but I also know that ideas are cheap, and the execution or figuring out like what should I actually focus my time and energy on is a big challenge when you're a creative entrepreneurial person. So I've seen that development of new ideas from a lot of different angles, from the VC side, working at a VC, working at different technology companies, having my own growth marketing agency. I also have some TradFi experience in like the innovation, air quotes, within big banks. And along the way, I've also tried and failed at many of my own ideas. A few succeeded, and I sold them. But I think like that concept of energy and time is something that has been kind of like a main topic in my entire career. Like, why would you spend your energy and time on a certain idea, right? Like, how much proof do you need in order to really spend more time, energy, and also financial resources on it? And I think that's a nice bridge to the Bitcoin angle. I think that we're going to talk about is I discovered Bitcoin in 2013. I always share, I bought at 300. That's not to flex because I sold at 4,000. Everything, right? So
hey, you bought at 300, sold at 4,000.
That was great. No, that was great. I mean, I felt great. But now I have less than before, of course. So, I mean, but that's how it goes. And so I've been studying Bitcoin also for the last 10, 11 years. Of course, like on and off, I got distracted by the whole crypto thing, NFTs, ICOs, and stuff like that. Until I think, about 4 years ago or something, I just realized, this is the most important technological discovery that you should pay attention to. And to tie that back to the time and energy topic, the main thing, how I kind of think about Bitcoin right now is that, we all have a finite time in our life. We don't know how much time we have, right? So it's our most scarce asset. And the energy that we can expend in this time, let's say every day or every week, every year, whatever, that's basically our productivity, and what we do is we give that energy, that finite energy, away in our finite time, and we receive a reward for that. That is that can be infinitely created, which is a pretty dumb trade if you ask me. And so, what would be a better reward for that, or maybe even easier? What would be a better way for you to store your energy and time? The reward that you got, even though if it's fiat money. How are you able to save that basically abstracted energy and time? I think that's how you can call money into the future, because you need capital towards the future to build anything, whatever you want, whether that's a company or a family or buy a home or move somewhere or whatever. Like, because that future is uncertain for everyone. You need a tool to lower that uncertainty to a certain degree. So you can be optimistic about the future. And I think the core of how I view Bitcoin is that Bitcoin helps you to lower that uncertainty towards the future. Of course, it's never zero, right? Everything you do has a risk to it. I think, that very much, right? But if you stay with fiat money and use fiat money and all the products of fiat money, that is being debased, right? Like more and more units are being created, which debases each unit of the existing currencies, which in my mind actually increases your uncertainty towards the future, which makes you less optimistic about the future, and also, less prone or able to actually build something towards the future. I was in Antwerp, in Belgium, a few weeks ago, and I was in a building that was built in 1525 or something. Wow. And I was standing in front, and I was looking at like the emblem, where it says like established in 1525. And I was just thinking, like, what has been built in the past, 50 years? Let's take 50 years that will stand here in 500 years, And I don't really know, but there's not a lot, And I think that is something that we have lost, the quality, or just this aspiration of building something that is so grand, or maybe that's even only finished after we die, like the people that started building in Barcelona in Spain, you have the Sagrada Familia, which is like a crazy church. And the people that started that didn't even see that being finished, So that's kind of where my head is at around Bitcoin. I think that adopting Bitcoin will allow us to actually have a positive outlook towards the future, and will enable us to do big things again. So I think that's a quick summary of where I'm from and what my thoughts are around Bitcoin there.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. So when you started, you decided to start your podcast, your show, the Bitcoin for Millennials. When people who are not millennials, like we have millennials working with us here at Rockstar, a lot of our clients are millennials who want to kind of build a better future. They have concerns about the future. For someone who's not a millennial, so I'm Gen X or a boomer, or maybe the younger generation after millennials, what do you think is misunderstood from, with what millennials are trying to achieve and some of the frustrations that millennials have? I feel like it's suddenly a global feeling that millennials have had. But now that you've been doing this for some time, what is it? Like what's going on that people who are maybe older than millennials right now don't quite understand?
Yeah, well, I'll share that a lot of boomers actually also watch my channel, which is interesting. They always say I'm a boomer, and then they say they sold all their real estate, for example, which is fascinating. I think,
and just so you know, it's because and I'm sure you do know this. It's the content you're producing is really high level. It's quality content. So of course, it doesn't surprise me that everyone's listening to your podcast. And as the millennials grow older, which for me seems weird because in my head, millennials are a certain age.
I mean, I feel young still.
You are young. No, you are young. Yeah, you are young.
Again, for you, right? Like, but
I talked about millennials 10 years ago, and I'm like, oh my gosh, the millennials are starting to grow up. So it's going to evolve, and you're going to be more and more of a force. But anyway, back to the question. So what is it that people misunderstand?
Yeah, well, I think, also older generations feel the same thing, but I think that, most millennials are in this age range where they either are progressing in their career, or maybe they're living together, or they want to go from renting to maybe buying a house, right? Or they're starting a family, or they're expanding a family, or they want to get married. Like big things happen in, the late 20s. Until like early 30s, right? Like you choose a certain direction in your life that is perhaps a bit more final than the directions that you chose in your early 20s, right? And so I think that in that phase, you are, kind of programmed, or at least inspired. Let's call it inspired, right? By what your parents did, and like our parents, which is more towards the boomer generation, right? Or late Gen X, or towards the boomer generation. For them, it was like, well, we started living together. We bought a house that went up in value. Then we bought a bigger house, so we were able to have a child or multiple children. We saved, and we put money in stocks, and that accrued in value, etc. Right? So there was a really nice time in the 80s and 90s where basically the sky was the limit. I mean, we have all the movies that attest to that, I think, from that time as well. But that game, or that way of building and establishing your wealth is basically already played, and it's gone. So it's not that what has been told to us is not how the game is still played, right? So, I mean, you focus on real estate. I think some people are doing really well in real estate, but that's not like, I mean now, but maybe also in the past, right? That doesn't mean that you're actually good, right? Like a lot, I feel, was part of luck. So if I see people that are in like their late 40s and they tell something like that, yeah, I bought a house and then it went all up, and then I said, well, but did you like snipe it, or did you like research it? Like, what did you do? No, I just was like, I want to live there, and then I said, okay, but there's not skill involved, right? So if you bought at the right time and the price went up and you were able to buy another bigger house, that doesn't really attest to your skill as some sort of trader, right? It's just a moment in time when you were apparently able to buy and then move on like that. And it's kind of like this game is stacked against the millennials. There are so many housing shortages across Western countries, especially. Prices are going up. Prices are out of reach of people. You see birth rates decline because people don't have either a home or the capital to actually have a positive outlook on raising children, etc. So you see that there's a big impact in this kind of like phase of the financial system on this generation specifically. And I would say it is probably the most important generation, in a sense that we will grow into more power when we grow older, right? We are going to lead companies, etc. And so I feel that foundation that we actually all want and need, right, which is housing and hopefully a family, I feel that is this it's just a biological thing that we want to do, right? Like the urge to procreate, etc. The fact that is influenced by the bad quality or the worsening quality of the money, I think is just one of the biggest topics that not a lot of people talk about, but I think everyone feels it, right? Like either, I think your children are then a bit younger, but they are getting here as well eventually, like even as parents of millennials or as, your generation and your children, that there's this certain path that the fiat money is following, that is, in words of Lynn Alden, pretty famous, person in the Bitcoin space that talks about, finance and economics. She says, like this train ain't stopping. I think once you see that, and for example, understand that, for my mother who's about to retire, I'm not even sure if her pension is actually there. I mean, it's on paper, there's numbers. I don't know if it's there. For my generation, I definitely know it's not there. And I think that combined with where we are right now in this phase of our lives, I just feel that, for me, it felt kind of like a calling. Okay, I need to focus on my generational peers to tell them about Bitcoin, which I think is the best way to at least attempt to, build and grow your wealth towards the future.
So if there was someone who was older that pushed back on you and said, well, Bram, you know what, you don't know my story. It was hard on all of us. Like in the 1980s or 90s, I was making a small amount of money and I had to kind of work 2 jobs and start my family. But I managed to do it. You're overthinking it. You're just overthinking it. You're making a problem that doesn't exist. You're complaining. It's not really the way you're suggesting. What would you push back on? Like, how would you answer that person who maybe doesn't have the depth of knowledge that you have of the monetary system? How do you attempt to answer that question?
Very good question. I would like half agree. I think every generation has its own problems and struggles. I mean, that's all part of it. So I'm not saying that other generations didn't struggle. I think it's just in a different way, right? Like the problem that I'm talking about was not experienced by you or these boomers. And the problem that we are talking about is the accelerated debasement of the fiat money that we are using, right? So your generation and the boomer generation was able to at least build up or have the possibility to build up like a portfolio of harder assets than the fiat money, which is just really not an option for millennials. And
Why is it not an option? Just the price gap between earning and asset price?
Yes. So if you look at there's this famous picture of like you in let's say mid-70s, you could be a family with 2 children and you could have a car and purchase a home on one salary, right? And I don't know the average home prices. Let's talk about the US. That's probably in like the 150s or something, or less. Like one, something like that.
Yeah.
But if you look now, the average home in America is probably like $500,000 or like 480-ish. But the wages didn't rise with that. So that gap is widening, and so is the optionality is getting smaller, and that's why there's now people that both have to work, right? Mm-hmm. And so that dynamic that you had when you had the age of, let's say, early 30s is just totally different. So I'd say it's probably a fair comment, but it's easy to say. If you look back, it was just a different time, and I think we are further along in the degradation of fiat money than when you were at this age, which actually means that it's also accelerating. You see that with the national debt of the US, for example, that whether you want it or not, we all look at the United States. They have the best currency of the worst, right? Like all the currencies are fiat currencies. They're all based on debt. Almost all the Western countries have a deficit in their government. The productivity is not growing, so they have to print more money to either sustain the deficits, but also to pay the interest on all the money that they borrow from their treasuries, which, when you, for example, look at the US, that's getting less and less attractive for outside parties to buy. So there will come a time and place where the treasury has to just print. They have to create more money just to nominally, change the numbers on the debt. But that doesn't mean that there is increased productivity or there is a less of a deficit, etc. So this, like I said, the train is not stopping. There's just this path that's being followed, and in essence, that's just the degradation of the money is just accelerating, and that's why I talk a lot about Bitcoin. I see, for example, I don't know if that, real estate and let's say S&P 500 was really the opportunity for you and for the boomers. S&P 500 more for you, I'd say, and the real estate before you. And I think, millennials are probably the best generation to understand Bitcoin, which basically is, it's digital property, but it has ties to the physical world, right? You need physical electricity to create these digital coins, and I feel millennials are the probably the best generation to understand, because we lived through this analog time, going into the digital time, and so I just find it a really interesting opportunity for our generation, and I really see it as kind of a lifeline to establish a future for ourselves.
Real estate investing isn't always easy, but it can be relatively simple. And that's where the Rockstar Inner Circle comes in. Look, there's a lot of real estate investing information out there these days. That's why it's so important to pick your sources wisely. And even though investing isn't always going to be the easiest process, it does not have to be super complicated. That's where tried, tested, and proven strategies like the ones that Rockstar members use come into play. Everything shared in the Inner Circle is built from firsthand, on the streets experience in the current market. It's all up to date, things that people are actually implementing today. In fact, the ongoing courses are delivered live, so they're always up to date with the absolute latest real life experiences. As a Rockstar member, get ongoing access to over 20 different systems and programs covering things like which properties investors like and why, our private rental system, what opportunities the investors are scooping up in student housing currently, the legal side of investing, why or how to use corporations, certifications as an investor, a mortgage class with the absolute latest options and programs to build your portfolio as an investor, because they're different than a regular home buyer. And there's a whole ton more in all those different classes. Of course, to implement all these strategies, members get access to unlimited private one-on-one coaching with an actual human experienced investor, not an AI chatbot, not ChatGPT or anything like that. It goes beyond training, classes, and real estate. It's a community for people looking to take control of their own finances, to give themselves options and allow them to live life on their terms. With ongoing live and virtual opportunities to connect, it's built for investors by investors. You can see everything members get at rockstarinnercircle.com/member. It's rockstarinnercircle.com/member. Now back to the show.
You know what's interesting listening to you? Obviously, very well spoken. You research this deeply. You bring on guests and share this, and you're trying to better, I feel like, the community around you directly and the community globally. When I hear you speak, I grew up in the tech industry in the late 1990s and the 2000s. I worked at a company called Oracle. And some of the people that were slightly older than me at that time that were really connected into the software industry, also very smart people, well-spoken. And if I watch that industry and reflect back on it now from today and look back, some of the characters I met in that industry who were really at the forefront of that game really became influential in tech over the next 20 years, from like the late 90s till today. So even longer than the next 20, 25 years, and really brought a lot of great things. I mean, we could debate some of the technologies, maybe not great, but a lot of technology improvements were great. They were rewarded handsomely for doing that. They supported each other. There was competitors in there, but they also supported each other. And that community coming out of, Palo Alto in California kind of spread around the world. But the core of that community really benefited from being early in that space. What's interesting to me about watching Bitcoin and hearing someone like you speak is Bitcoin is reminding me of that era. And it's a bunch of people like you at your age, but now global, who are all knowing each other, speak to each other, communicate with each other, support each other. And the opportunity for Bitcoin is even greater than the technology boom that came out of the late 90s and 2000s, because now we're talking about the decentralization of value, of money, globally. And a bunch of you guys, Bram, all know each other. And if I map out the next 10, 15, 20 years, you're going to reflect back on this time and kind of cherish it, because you guys saw the opportunity, you jumped on it. Who knows what you're going to be doing in 15 and 20 years, but it's going to be something awesome. You might be just on a farm raising some cattle by then. Who knows what you're
I hope so.
Yeah. Who knows what you're going to be doing, but you will be very influential in a very important space. And I feel like your connection, your network is also going to be very influential. And for me, that's exciting, because now I see a generation of smart young people all trying to help each other, who are going to grow their purchasing power together, and they're globally going to have an impact. This isn't just an impact coming out of one part of the world. Mm-hmm. This is a global impact.
I agree.
So to map forward the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, like I can imagine speaking to you in 20 years, and it's going to be like a completely different space that you're in, and you're going to look back on everything you've done. And I think really, have some deep satisfaction of the time that you spent in that space. So I'm getting off a target there.
No, I love that. Maybe to add, because I love what you said. I feel that, so I was in the startup space, and I've been to Silicon Valley a few times, like the most active era is like between 2013 and 2016 for me. And I totally understand what you mean, right? Like if you walk around in San Francisco, like startups is all you talk about, and you can talk to anyone about any startup or any idea, right? And you will have an engaging conversation. And, that type of community that is there, or a vibe is I don't know if that's the word, but it's like, the interests are aligned of people, right? And I was a person like that, but I was stuck on the other side of the ocean, right? But I felt that when I walked there, that there was a place for me, basically, right? So I was like living that on the internet or digitally and a bit locally. But when I went to Silicon Valley, I really felt that, right? And I 100% agree. It's similar with Bitcoin. I think the difference with Bitcoin is actually that, there's this competitiveness in business, right? Or for example, in VC investing, I want to be the first, I want to be the earliest, I want to be the lead investor or whatever. So there's kind of like this zero-sum game mentality, right? Like if I win, you lose, and that's kind of the game that's played. I don't know if that's similar in real estate, but I can imagine in some places, perhaps, right? And what I love about Bitcoin is that, this is a global, decentralized monetary network, and you can only benefit from it. So not as in, you're going to get rich or whatever. I mean, just the usage of Bitcoin as a store of value or as money. You can only benefit from that if you adhere to the rules of Bitcoin. And Bitcoin, what are the rules of Bitcoin? It's basically a computer protocol, right? Which has the rules written down. Everyone can look that up. That's open source code. And there's tens of thousands of computers around the world, nodes that check if, and the miners, right? They check if the rules are still followed, and they do that every 10 minutes. And they check if the blockchain of Bitcoin, right, which is basically the ledger where all the information in this monetary network is stored, if that is still correct. And so in a decentralized way, without anyone knowing who's actually participating, some parties, of course, are known, but we established this monetary network, basically. And I can only benefit from it if I follow the rules. And I trust that I can benefit from it because I don't have to, it's trustless. I don't have to trust you. I know that you are into Bitcoin too, but I know that you are following the rules because that is the only way to benefit from it. I hope that makes sense. But what is interesting is that is not a zero-sum game. That's a mutually beneficial game, right? So us talking about Bitcoin, or me talking about Bitcoin on my podcast, or someone maybe at an event that you organize talking about Bitcoin, we all add to Bitcoin, right? And so I love that in some way where in maybe the tech space or the real estate space, you would hold information, and not maybe share it with the world, because it's a zero-sum game, right? So you lose your edge. Actually, when you adopt Bitcoin, you're kind of incentivized to tell everyone about it because it's beneficial for anyone who joins, right? So I love that change of dynamic in well, I don't want to say industry, but just in this space. It's so positive, and I just love that, and I think that's a big contradiction to also my experience in the tech space. So once you see that Bitcoin is the best, savings technology to preserve and grow your wealth towards the future, you basically want to tell everyone about it,
So you're interesting because of your history and going through this. We have a lot of people who come to us and say, well, Tom, I missed Bitcoin. It's already, hitting six figures. I missed that opportunity. I'm going to jump on some of this other stuff in hopes of getting some returns and catching up. And then, maybe I'll jump into Bitcoin, maybe I won't. Now that you've been through, the amount of time you've been in Bitcoin, how would you explain, or how do you attempt to explain it to people who are looking at some of the other coins or blockchains or whatever in a similar fashion to Bitcoin? Do you have like a standard answer you use, or how do you try to get them to see the difference?
Yeah, it's good. It's a really good question. So I think I'm kind of like torn here. So my initial kind of like triggered answer would be,
have fun staying poor and move on.
Something like that, but more like, the mentality of thinking I'm too late, I lost, I only found it now. That's a zero-sum game mentality. You know what I mean? That's not a positive mentality. That's not trusting yourself, being able to have a certain diligence before you can have an actual opinion about it, right? Like it's an emotional response, like, oh, I'm too late, I suck, or whatever. So I'm going to try my luck with these other crypto things. So that would be my initial reply, like realize how you are judging this, and if you approach this from an emotional standpoint, like, oh, I'm too late, blah, blah, and then you're going to look at these other things, you're going to get wrecked, I'd say. Like that's not a rational approach. But on the other side, I do think you should get wrecked to a certain degree to understand the eventual difference between Bitcoin and, all the 20,000 whatever other attempts in crypto that came after that, right? And so how I explain that now is, Bitcoin itself is an invention. It's a combination of lots of different technologies that have been researched for probably the past 50, 60 years, if not longer, if you go all the way back to the origins of cryptography and stuff like that. And that's been put together in a certain way that creates a digital monetary network where no one has to trust each other. This is one of the biggest breakthroughs, is to be able to, over distance with anonymity between parties, create trust, basically. And so these technologies that have been put together enable that for us. And so what does that mean? That means that I can now sell a Bitcoin or send a Bitcoin to someone in a place that I don't even have to know. I don't have to know their name. I can just have the wallet and then send it there. They don't have to trust my word that I actually send it to them, because they can look it up on the blockchain that it went from my address to their address. And that's basically it, right? So if you sell a property, you have to go to a notary with the other party, and they're going to give you the contract, and then you sign, and then you show, see, I signed, and then there's other parties that put it in the local register and whatever. So there's
an appraisal, you
whatever,
have to trust.
Yeah.
There's
all these parties involved, right? Then even the banks, right? If you have another bank, then me and I sell you a property, and then so there's no direct exchange of value, whatever the value is that we determined on or agreed upon, right? Whether that's a house or a car or whatever. And so that is pretty profound by itself, right? So exchanging value without any third party intermediary, without any party that has, without any counterparty risk, etc. That enables it enables us to do that. So that's one on a global scale, 24/7, 365, etc. But what Bitcoin, what is the discovery for Bitcoin based on the invention, is the discovery of absolute digital scarcity. So the fact that any asset that you can use to store value, right, to store your wealth or grow your wealth, you can make more of. You can build more houses. We can find more gold. We can build more cars. Of course, there are things that are scarce in the sense that, a house on the beach in Malibu is unique, or some house that is made by some famous architect, that's unique, and that can have a certain value that cannot be matched in a sense. But it's very subjective also, because I have to like the style, I have to like the beach, for example, right? So it can be scarce, but I can only sell it to someone who also likes the beach.
Yeah, it doesn't have characteristics of money. There's no money characteristics in that house.
I would say there's added characteristics, because it's so unique, that make it harder to find another person for that you can transact it with, right? So there is nothing that is basically provably finite scarce, or absolute finite scarce. And that is the case with Bitcoin. So there's only going to be 21 million Bitcoin. That is what is written in this code. And so basically what Bitcoin produces towards the future is certainty. We talked about the uncertainty in the future, right? Because we don't know how much time we have. But this is basically the only asset in the world of which we know, how many there are in 2039, in 2100, in 10 minutes, and so that is very profound, because that did not exist before. And so this absolute digital scarcity makes that if the demand goes up, the supply cannot. The supply actually is just programmed, right? So if we want more Bitcoin, we still have to wait another, maximum of 10 minutes, right? Every 10 minutes, there's new Bitcoins that are added. So I like the quote. There's a quote by Jack Mallers that talks about gold and Bitcoin. And he says, well, if the gold price goes up, more people are going to mine gold, because the incentive rises to invest in certain, tooling or resources, land, whatever, to find more gold. But if you want more Bitcoin, you can start mining, for example, but you cannot get more. And so he has this analogy, it's really nice. Like gold is stuck in the ground and you can dig as deep as you want, but Bitcoin is stuck in time. So the issuance of Bitcoin is stuck in time, and we can calculate when, and how many Bitcoins new Bitcoins come into circulation until 2140, when all the Bitcoins are mined. And so that is a very, very, very special thing that people need to understand. So
I
it's
never
both
thought about that, stuck in time. I guess I've heard him say that. I never really thought about that line. That's a great
even
point.
If you want more, you cannot have that, right? And that is interesting, because then if you want more and you can't mine it, then you're going to buy it. But if more people at the same time want it, then that drives up the price, because the supply is limited. And I think that is something, if there's one thing that people want to take away from this conversation, it's that. So absolute digital scarcity is something that has never existed before. And it's so special because it's digital. So it's kind of like, it's digital, so it's not really tangible. But because it's 100% ensured that this will act like advertised, I want to say, air quotes, right? Like written in the code. The whole point is that what is written in the code is followed. So it does make it some sort of tangible, as in like there's a proof and an incentive for the entire network. The prosperity of the network only will come to fruition if these promises are followed. So there's like this feedback loop in it. And why is it also tangible? Like I can write down a private key, a password to a Bitcoin wallet, and give that to you, and that might represent $1 million. But then if you rip up, you remember the words of the password in your head, and you rip up the paper, then nobody knows where that $1 million is, basically. You can even put a password like that in a vault in Switzerland, and when you have the wallet address, so the public key, you can send Bitcoin to that address, and then basically you send Bitcoin to a wallet or to a vault in Switzerland. So like stuff like that, I really like to show as examples that, it's kind of like it floats in the air here. But if I show you numbers and letters, that could represent $1 million, for example. So it's a really strange thing. It can be digital and physical at the same time. But this absolute digital scarcity is a profound discovery. It's kind of like the wheel. Like you cannot invent the wheel another time. You see NASA, for example, work on a wheel without air, for the rovers on Mars or the moon. But that's still the construct of a wheel. It's still the same concept. It looks a bit different, but it's still the concept of a wheel. And so you cannot really discover that twice, basically. And so then what is crypto? So you have something called the blockchain trilemma, which is security, decentralization, and the speed. And in Bitcoin, we are focused on the decentralization and the security, because that is really the foundation to have this exist for 1,000+ years, or into infinity, basically. And the speed, because this is like the base layer of exchanging value, right? We should not compare it to Visa or MasterCard or whatever, because that is basically like a layer 7 or something in the payment scheme. Because if you send me an invoice, I pay with a credit card. That does not mean that money maybe shows up in your account, but the banks didn't settle, right? And all these things. So Bitcoin is final settlement. I send you a Bitcoin. It's not in my possession anymore. It's fully in your possession. And I cannot do anything about that. So you have this blockchain trilemma. That's only kind of like the technical angle. But a lot of cryptos took this speed. For example, they said like, oh, that's too low. I'm going to build a faster blockchain. And then they say, oh, I'm better than Bitcoin. But they are started by a foundation, a company, and it's firm. Not... Exactly. It's not decentralized, which I would argue is more important. So kind of how I describe all the crypto stuff, this was a long entry to your question. How I would describe the crypto stuff is basically an attempt by an investor, a group, a foundation, a startup to build a certain system where people do things, they exchange value in some way, or they do stuff on a platform or in a system, whatever it is. That's very broad. And because they do that, what's exchanged between them is a certain token. And based on that usage, the token derives its value from this usage. But what is really interesting is that when I was in my crypto phase, I actually started a startup. I wanted to build a startup, which was kind of like a market research platform for crypto. So in my validation phase, I talked to over 200 founders and investors and teams working on ideas. And no one seemed to realize that in order for a token on a certain digital platform to actually have value, there has to be organic value that people derive from that platform, right? So let's say there's like a eBay with a token, right? Like a marketplace where people sell stuff and they can use the token. Well, if you cannot find people that have an interesting offer and people that want to buy whatever the offer is, then that whole token doesn't deserve any value. But what you see is that a lot of these crypto tokens are like traded just based on, well, maybe this could be a good idea, maybe this could be a good system, and that's where they derive the value from. It's literally just trading like some sort of stock almost. But it's not that these tokens derive value from actual usage on the platforms or in the systems that people build. So after 7, almost 8 years of also, getting into the weeds of crypto and trying out a lot of stuff, I mean, there are some companies that work. Like I love Polymarket, for example. I think that's it's like online prediction market. Like that's a good example. But I mean, in 8 years of building and thousands of ideas, of course, there are some things that work. But if you're distracted by the idea that you are too late to Bitcoin and you think like, oh, I'm going to dabble in crypto and see if I can earn money there. Like those are two totally different things, basically. I think that is the core of all that I just said. But I think it's really good to make that distinction, and people talk about Bitcoin being digital gold. I think it's provably better than gold, but this is used for just an analogy or an illustration for you to understand, like, oh, what kind of category should I put it in? And I would put Bitcoin in kind of that category. It's like a digital commodity, digital capital, like Michael Saylor says. And all the crypto tokens, are like credits in a system of a company. Sometimes it looks like a little stock of a company, something like that. It's very undefined. And so these two things are pretty much really different. And I would also argue you are definitely not early to Bitcoin because it's only at like 2 trillion in market cap, whereas the total value of all the store value assets in the world is around 900 trillion. So
when you look at the financial system now, sometimes I think, holy smokes, I can see a time, maybe sooner than I anticipated, where it is used, Bitcoin is used as a form of collateral. Like right now in the real estate world, if you have some properties, you can walk into the bank and say, I have this property, I have a small loan on it or I have no loan on it. Would you use that property as collateral to lend me some fiat dollars? And of course, that's like how it's done.
Yeah.
And now that we're all understanding Bitcoin more and more, I'm like, holy smokes, if I'm a banker and if I'm a forward-thinking banker, if I could get a piece of collateral that has no counterparty risk, that is global and instantly liquidity, I can liquidate it instantly 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to see some bank somewhere offer some fiat type loan against this collateral, maybe held in a multi-sig wallet or something where both parties control it with contractual terms, deciding on who gets the Bitcoin and so forth.
Yes. Well, you can automate that with code, but yes.
You can automate that as well. So you could do all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I guess my question to you would be, there's going to be some pushback from the existing banking system to say, no, like this is now a threat. You must put your Bitcoin inside the system in a form of an ETF or deposit it and we custody, and only then will you be able to borrow against it. But we have full control of it. So then I see a world in the future that I'm like, holy smokes, there's going to be a divide here between the old system trying to control the Bitcoin and a wild new system where some free market bank somewhere is going to offer some solutions like I just described to people, and it's going to be outside the existing system. And there's going to be a big battle going forward. When I say this, what comes to mind for you?
You're 100% right.
You think so?
And people are doing this, right? I think this is a good moment in this conversation where we kind of like merge, Bitcoin and what you're doing. I mean, the bread and butter of a bank is mortgages and loans, right? I worked at a big bank in the risk department, walked around with the CRO. There's all these econometrists, all these PhD
oh my
people.
God, I can only imagine what that was like. Yeah,
they're working on their Excels. And he told me, if I send all of these people home, nothing will happen. Because what do people pay on the first of the month or the last of the month, whatever? What's the first thing they pay? It's their mortgage. Okay. So 85 to 90% of all revenue and profit of big banks come from mortgages. And I mean, that business model is hundreds of years old, right? You have a pile of money, you assess a risk, you give it out, and you know how this works. So I love this topic because this is going to happen. I mean, I've spoken to people, just rich people that have like 100 million that say like, well, if we can do, if you send 500K in Bitcoin somewhere, I'll send you 500K in dollars. So you can buy a home, then you repay me, you just pay back the 500 or just like interest as long as you have that. But that is crazy competitive compared to a bank, right? So if you borrow 500K from a bank, I don't know what the rates are in Canada or in America, but let's say here it would be like, I don't know, 2,000 a month or something. Similar. I mean, if that can be 1,200, holy moly, So, and what I find interesting is that this entire dynamic shifts from banks towards perhaps wealthy individuals or just companies that have cash, because there's like a double collateral, right? You have the Bitcoin, as you said, instantly liquid. You can sell that at the exact moment when someone defaults, basically, or after you send them 3 reminders, etc. Like at one point, it's just like done. Yeah. But yeah, imagine doing that with the home. That's also part of the collateral there. I mean, we just talked about it. It's not that when you decide, I want to sell a home, that you instantly do that. So I think that combination is going to be very strong and very competitive for what is the main business model of big banks, basically. And this CRO in that same conversation, he told me, like, if you default on your mortgage, then you're in a really shitty situation. Like that doesn't happen that often. I mean, it's part of it, right? But that doesn't happen that often. So this big part of their all over business model is just very safe and very secure and very predictable. And I think it will be very disruptive when Bitcoin gets into that mix, mainly because once banks adopt Bitcoin, they kind of agree that it's a valid thing, which I think they don't want to do. But if they don't do it, then just wealthy individuals will turn themselves into mortgage companies, Bitcoin backed or Bitcoin collateral mortgage companies, something. Yeah, that's very disruptive. I think that idea is just very disruptive and would, I think, break open kind of this monopoly that banks have on financing homes as well.
And I think it's almost inevitable when you have a protocol like Bitcoin where the rules are so clearly outlined for all of us to verify it and it's global. No longer are these fiefdoms in Canada's banking system and America's banking system and the different European banking system. All of a sudden now it's completely global.
I can get a mortgage from someone in China or whoever, or Canada or whatever. Like that doesn't really matter.
I don't think the banks see this coming. I know the Canadian ones are just blind to this. We have basically a monopoly in, a few big banks in this country. And it reminds me of the telcos like in the early 2000s when they were still selling landlines to people's homes. And then the cell phones came out, and some of my friends, when we started buying homes, they were like, you know what? I'm not going to get a landline anymore. I'm actually just going to use my mobile phone. And if Apple didn't come out with the iPhone where these telcos could start pivoting and selling data instead of landlines, I think they would have all just completely went under. So to me, I'm watching the banks and going, how are they going to pivot from this? Because right now the base of the system is treasuries and bonds and real estate. When this gets disrupted, I don't really know how they're going to pivot. It's going to be kind of fascinating. Bram, before I lose you, I want to just ask, what are you doing? I don't know if you want to talk about it or now, but you're up to some new stuff. I know you made an announcement. Are you free to talk about that stuff? What are you doing now? What's going on with you?
Yeah. So last year, September, I started my podcast that we mentioned, Bitcoin for Millennials, and I had a goal. I was like, okay, I shouldn't make it too. How do you say, like too specific or too perfectionist? I'm quite a perfectionist. So I thought, okay, what's like the one thing that could help me, get a cadence and keep going, etc. So I saw a video of Mr. Beast, the famous YouTuber, and he said, you should just, whatever you make, whether it's a podcast or a YouTube channel or whatever, just make 100 episodes or 100 videos, and only then you are able or allowed to think about if you want to continue it or not, right? Because you have to learn about, keeping it going, learning about making videos or podcasts or whatever you're doing. And so I thought, that's a good idea just to keep myself in check. I'm going to make 100 episodes and then I'll see. So I published 100 episode, I think like 3-ish weeks ago or something. And literally on the day that I released it, I signed a sponsor for the whole year. Next year, I had some new amazing guests, and I also joined a Bitcoin company. I really wanted to do that because, I was consulting with a fintech scale-up company 3 days a week. I had to drive there. I was driving in my car for like 2.5 hours a day, and I was like, what am I doing? And I'm thinking about Bitcoin all the time anyway, and I'm listening to Bitcoin podcasts in the car. And so I thought, I really would love to make the jump to Bitcoin. And fortunately, Onramp Bitcoin, which is a company based in Dallas and Austin, they gave me the opportunity to join them as the head of growth. So I'm going to help them establish their system for making all the efforts that they're doing. It's still in early stages, so it's all hustle basically to systematize that a bit more and see if I can help them create a system to grow in a sustainable way. And so that's super fun, and so I'm really happy to be able to make the jump to Bitcoin and then just think and work on Bitcoin every day, all day. So
I can tell by your smile you're happy. I can tell by your smile you're happy. Yeah. So what does this mean for the podcast? Does it continue? I guess
yes, 100%. No. I do. I found an editor now. Was a guy that listened to my podcast. He said, "Well, I'm a video and audio engineer. Maybe I can help you level it up." And I didn't make any videos before the podcast, or I ever did a podcast. So I was like, okay, this is kind of the level where I can kind of bring it to. And so he's editing my videos now, so I have a bit more time also to do more research and focus on guests, etc. So I'm working 3 days a week at Onramp, and the other days I'm focused on growing the podcast, which also just reached like 10K subs on YouTube. So it's growing, so that's nice.
For anyone who's listening to this, who's around the same age as you, maybe younger, who wants to get in and do their own stuff, what advice, now that you've done the podcast for this many episodes, looking back, what can you tell them? Like, because when everybody starts, you probably have like some insecurity of like, will people listen to me? Can I do a good job? You have a bit of an imposter syndrome, perhaps, of like, well, who am I to be out there speaking about this kind of stuff? Is there anything you could share with someone who's just thinking like, I want to get into this more, I don't know what to do? By reflecting on your own journey, anything come to mind?
Yeah, I think there's 3 things. Like I always keep myself kind of like away from this imposter syndrome by just thinking that everyone is winging it. Yeah. That's just what I say in my head. Right, like, okay, everyone is winging it.
It's the truth.
Yeah,
that's like the truth.
It's the truth. Even people that are successful or that you look up to or think are successful or whatever, like everyone's just doing something, like that's basically it. So like, that's how I try to ground myself. If I think like, okay, who am I again? Like, who's this other guy again? Like, I don't know, like, so it's just do that. And I think you can trust like the magic of the internet. Like if it's good enough, sometimes you do something and you suck at it, or it's a bad idea or whatever. I think that's only like a learning opportunity. But I don't think you should underestimate the power of the internet, like how far your content or your product or your service can travel. Like you never know. So yeah, everyone is winging it. I think, just having the consistency, like I'm happy I chose the do 100 episodes thing. Like I never did something like that before, but I've experienced that if you do it and it's like a simple trick for yourself to commit to, then after a certain amount of time, well, I luckily, I don't know, I got it on the 100th episode, right? That like stuff came to me. I mean, that just works. Like that's real. Like
we are in a simulation, Bram. We are in a simulation.
So you manifested in that way. I 100% agree. And I think the last thing I'd say is I got this from Gary Vaynerchuk. I don't know if you know him. Like this marketing guy from New York. I don't do him justice by saying it, just a marketing guy. But he said like 0 or 1 is better than 0. So if you have your first episode and 2 people watched, that's more than 0, right? So somebody watched and somebody enjoyed it. Or if you start a newsletter and some people subscribe to it, right? It's all more than 0. So it means there is something there, right? And I think to tie it back to like the beginning of the conversation, when you have an idea for something, it's not that other people that might be your target customer or target listener or consumer or whatever, that they wake up in the morning and think like, oh, wow, yeah, Tom has a great idea or Bram has a great idea. No, like the person that has the idea has to go out into the world to figure out who it resonates with, how you can mold or shape it to make it more attractive or to reach more of those people, right? So once you commit to an idea, you basically give yourself a problem, right? I mean, for me, that's entrepreneurship, is just like, I want something to exist. It's not there. So that's a problem, right? And in order for me to get there, I just solve more problems. And by solving more problems, there's, more problems arise. And so for me, that's kind of like what entrepreneurship is. But once you accept that, you will get to a point where it will become clear to you what you do, for who, what they appreciate about it, what works for you, what doesn't. And that gives you like this foundation to actually continue with an idea. So allow yourself some time to get to that point, or just be honest along the way. If you really did your best and it's not working, you don't want to waste your time and energy on something.
Change course. Yeah. What's interesting hearing you speak is that I just know from doing different things in business for a long time is that I may say something and it just doesn't resonate with someone. You, Bram, will have a different way to articulate the same point, and someone might listen to you say it and it just hits home for them. And so someone listening to this who is going to start their own business or their own content or their own podcast, you might say something in a way that's different from the both of us, but is the way that someone else
works.
And it still works.
Yes,
right?
100%.
And I love what you said earlier, just to kind of wrap this up with that. You said the Bitcoin community, it's like it's not a zero-sum game. We're all supporting each other. Like the people that I've met through this, like Max Hillenbrand and Jeff Booth and John Vallis and like yourself and Leon. We were talking about Leon before we started recording. We have an announcement on that I'm not going to mention to anyone just yet, but we're pretty excited to make an announcement about Leon. This is like a new community for me that I just feel grateful to be a part of. And if I have the chance to recommend your podcast because I'm talking to someone and I just think you're going to resonate with them, I'll happily do that. Yeah. And it's just a wonderful community to be a part of. Anyway, I'll stop. But Bram, thank you so much for doing this. You're doing some great work. I'm excited to see where you go in the next 10 years. We're going to be cheering you along.
Likewise.
And you have friends here. Anything you need, you let us know. You have friends over here forever. So thank you for doing this. Really appreciate it, Bram. Where can people find? Where's the best place? Is it Twitter, I guess?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I really appreciate you. And so thanks so much for inviting me. And I really enjoy just talking about this stuff. And I love what you said about, different people talk about different things with which resonates with different people around different, touch points. And I think that is very important, right? Like that authenticity. I think that's what we eventually talk about. It's like, because everyone is winging it, like all our voices are equal, right? Like, so if you've done your best to understand what you are talking about and you talk about it in the way that you would want to share it, which I think is authenticity in that sense, like you don't adjust to what you think people want to hear. You just talk in your lane, basically, then you can actually create that lane if you do it for a long enough time, you know,
Agreed.
and it resonates with some people in a sense, like it has to have some value, of course. But I think, again, you learn along the way. But where people can find me, mainly, on Twitter X, which is Bram K, so BRAMK. And they can find Bitcoin for Millennials on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Fountain, etc.
Thank you so much, Bram. Appreciate this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Cheers.